At InDigital, we know the public safety professionals hold themselves to a high standard. In fact, standard doesn't do it justice. In over 25 years working alongside you, carrying millions of calls over our IP networks, your dedication has inspired us. That's why our ESI Net goes beyond industry standards, not only I3 compliant, but designed to adapt to future development for a network you can count on when it matters most. Learn more at indigital.net.
Here in Greenville County, we have 8 different places where a 911 call can be answered.
It is the largest county in South Carolina. It's a challenge.
The type of information that a telecommunicator gets from Radius Plus is location-based technology. You can see where the caller is, if they have a medical issue, if they speak a different language. They're immediately able to text to that caller in their native language. It reduces response times because it immediately gets first responders where they need to be.
If Within the Trenches has ever taught you something, open your eyes to what it is like to be a 911 dispatcher, or has inspired you to become one, then help support us and join our Patreon. Get exclusive bonus content, one-of-a-kind swag, discounts on merchandise, ad-free early access to new episodes, and much more. To join, please visit patreon.com/WTT podcast. And if you're an industry partner, we have something for you as well. And now, for the show.
This is Jordan, and you're listening to the Code 7 Podcast Network.
Warning. This episode contains the 3 A's of podcasting: adult content, adult language, and awesomeness. You've been warned. Hey, what's going on? This is Ricardo of the Code 7 Podcast Network, and this is going to be episode 419 of Within the Trenches, true stories from the 911 dispatchers who live them. This episode is sponsored by InDigital, Rapid Deploy, as well as Carbine, and a big shout out to patrons. This episode is going to be a special one. This is from an Imagine Listening session that I did back in October for the 2021 Michigan Public Safety Telecommunications Conference. The beginning of this episode will be the stories that were written and passed in, and then it'll be followed up by the rest of the audio from those who were in attendance who shared a story on the microphone. This was an excellent session. There were so many people in there and people who were willing to share their stories, and it's, as I always say, it's hard to explain what it is like to be in the room during one of these sessions for Imagine Listening. It's just so powerful. And the fact that we're in there healing together in support of each other, as well as finding some form of closure through the power of storytelling. So I hope you enjoy this episode. As always, Imagine Listening starts it out, and it'll be followed up with an open mic session that'll come out a week or so later. So without further ado, here's episode 419, Imagine Listening. Imagine waking up after a good night's rest. The sun is shining, and you're getting ready for the day. Things seem a bit quiet though, so you check the rooms. Now imagine you're 911, taking a call from a mom who found her infant not breathing. You start CPR and have the ambulance headed out. Just as they arrive, you hear the child cry, and all is well. This is what it's like within the trenches. In this episode, you'll hear stories from the I Am 911 movement, a movement I started to fight the reclassification of dispatchers from clerical to protective and bring awareness to the types of calls that 911 dispatchers answer on a daily basis. This is an Imagine Listening session, and this was recorded live in front of an audience at the 2021 Michigan Public Safety Telecommunications Conference. Now, you heard the warning at the beginning, but I must warn you again and add that if you suffer from PTSD or have suicidal tendencies, you are listening at your own risk. The stories you're about to hear are all true and come from the dispatchers who lived them. While some stories have a good outcome, the majority are horrifying. This is our reality. Your worst day is our everyday. So let's start with a bang. I want you to imagine each story. Become the dispatcher who has taken each call, and imagine listening. I got a call from a woman who was crying so loud and uncontrollably that on multiple attempts, I could not get an address. The call came in with Phase 2 info, but being in a rural area with bad call service, I went with the location, not being able to get it from the woman. After going with it, I hear enough that Mom says she's not breathing. She is dead. After that, I entered the call. The one not breathing was a 3-month-old. It took 25 minutes for EMS and PD to get on scene. The husband got on and was calm enough to explain that they found her passed away in her crib. Knowing I had a 6-month-old just kept running through my head. The sergeant that responded said that it was the worst call her shift had dealt with in a very long time. The mother wouldn't allow anyone to touch her deceased child for over 45 minutes. Only time I have had to walk out of the room to take a break, to think, for a few minutes in 17 plus years. I am 911. A wife was on the phone saying her husband was trying to shoot himself. He had been diagnosed with dementia and Alzheimer's and didn't want to live. He was in the bathroom, locked in, and the gun was misfiring. I advised her to get out of the house. I was talking to her, how I understood because my mom had the same, and how hard it was. The wife was calming down when I heard the gunshot. She became hysterical and uncontrollable. Keep in mind, my officers just came on scene, and at that point, didn't know if he had killed himself or one of the officers. I am 911. You called me in a rage. I tried to calm you down. You wouldn't listen. I heard tires burning rubber. You were yelling for someone to pull over their vehicle. Your child was begging you to stop. You wouldn't listen. Your child saw a gun and warned you, and you wouldn't listen. Yet you insisted on approaching this vehicle. Finally, you saw the gun and ran hysterically back to your car, begging me for answers. At that moment, I told you, ma'am, your son begged you to stop. If you hadn't listened finally, this call would have not been an auto accident, but a shooting. At that moment, she realized her son was in fear. She thanked her son for saving her life. I thanked myself for answering her call. I am 911. I took a call from a woman frantically screaming and looking for a knife. Once I got her calmed down and understood what was happening, I instructed your parents to cut you down and tried to start CPR. You were gone, only 17 years old, the same age as my brother. I am 911. In 2003, I helped give your grandpa CPR during a fishing trip. You were 12. I still do not know if your grandpa lived that day. I am 911. You called after rolling your vehicle. You were 16. Your friend was 14. Neither of you were wearing a seatbelt. You didn't know where you were. You had been thrown from the truck. You kept telling me about the blood you could see pouring out from under the vehicle. You kept screaming your friend's name. The sound of your voice will haunt me. I knew she was dead, but could only tell you help was on the way. After help arrived, they asked me to call your mom. Her tears of relief are the backdrop to the sound of your friend's sister screaming during the death notification I heard, because there was an open mic on the portable radio of the trooper. I am 911. My partner and I started working a smoke alarm, then received your call that you woke up and your teenage son was in his room with it locked and smoke was coming out. The door was beyond hot. I had to ask you to get out of the house and leave him there. I am 911. I still hear your heart break when you came home from work to find your husband of many years dead. He had been trying to shovel out in front of the garage so that you could park your car. This is the first time my heart broke as a dispatcher. I felt your pain. I am 911. I took over your call for my partner. You reported that your apartment was on fire and you couldn't get out. I tried everything I could think of to get to the door where FD was trying to get to you for 11 minutes. I listened to you screaming that you were burning to death, and I knew you were. They got you, but you died on the way to the hospital. I am 911. I took the call from your wife when she found you shot in the garage. I stayed in the line with her and listened to her cry until help arrived. I am 911. This job is unique because you mourn the loss of people you have never met. I am 911. My work partner at the time lived just a few blocks from our center. It was slow around midnight, and she wanted to run home and grab some food. While she was gone, I answered a 911 call. It was her. She walked in the house to her boyfriend, actively, sexually assaulting her small child. I am 911. I answered a call from a 14-year-old that was beat bad by a 30-year-old that she was dating. I tried to comfort her, letting her know assistance was on the way. I am 911. I dispatched an unknown problem to my officers. I did a call back for more info. The caller was drugged and disoriented, but said she didn't know where she was, but she was held in a basement and had been raped. We didn't have a good address, just Annie Alley coordinates. She told me she heard officers, but they were at the wrong house. I told her to start screaming as loud as she could. She was rescued, and her attackers were part of a statewide sex trafficking ring. I am 911. It was December 20th. You were 2 months old. Your babysitter found you not breathing. I attempted CPR, which was not successful. I won't forget you. I am 911. I took a call from a 14-year-old that said she got a Snapchat from a friend saying she was being sexually assaulted. I sent an officer to her location to verify and started troopers to the possible location that the 14-year-old described to me. After 4 or 5 houses, they found the victim in a camper behind a residence. Come to find out, she'd been being assaulted all summer by a close family friend, but that night, we stopped it all and saved her. I am 911. I was a brand new dad. My daughter was 6 months old. I was training a new call taker, only a few days on the floor. She answered the phone to immediate screaming. I took over the call, found out that we had an infant not breathing after being placed to sleep in a car seat. We hung up on that and immediately picked up a dad who found his 12-year-old hanging from a bunk bed. It was doubly brutal to be both a dad and a telecommunicator. I am 911. We took a call once on a criminal sexual conduct/kidnapping. The caller did not know where she was. The call taker stayed on the phone as I dispatched units to the XY coordinates, and police finally found her, nude, She was later transported by EMS. I am 911. I took a call from my former boss's wife and daughter. I went to high school with the oldest daughter. They told me he had a stroke a week prior and wasn't breathing well. They were nervous to get him out of his wheelchair and onto the floor. I helped reassure them it was okay and we needed to get him on the floor to get his airway opened. They got him on the floor and we started CPR. Officers arrived along with EMS. But 30 minutes later, I found out he passed away. I am 911. I received a call from a woman who found a small child walking down the street in his underwear. He had blood on him. I was able to talk to him through her speakerphone in her car. He witnessed his mother, stepfather, and younger brother all being shot by his younger sister's father. He gave a name and full description of the perpetrator. We later found out that the younger sister was also shot by her father, but everyone lived. I am 911. I answered the call from a woman reporting shots fired. Little did I know, the caller was my sister-in-law. She was afraid and crying. Bullets had just come through her window where her mother-in-law was sitting. I had to compose myself. I did not tell her who I was, but I called her to comfort her after I completed the ticket. Thankfully, I was also able to calm her during the 911 call. That was an externally scary call for me. I am 911. On Father's Day, I spoke with a mother who had witnessed her daughter's vehicle involved in a crash behind her on the freeway. My partner was already on the phone with the girl's father, who knew they were dead. I was on the phone with the mother when she learned both her daughters had died. I listened to her sob with her husband. I am 911. I took the call when you found your son overdosing on heroin again. I heard it in your voice and heard your pleas for him to come back to you, your promise to help. I felt your desperation to bring him back, knowing it was too late. I am 911. I took the call when an uncle saw his nephews roll their ATV in the yard. They were trapped underneath. One was able to finally get out. The male keeps saying that the other is dead. They try to provide help. The uncle hears the sirens and then, after holding his composure, finally breaks down and starts crying because he knows he didn't make it. I am 911. The call I remember most is a young mother who called and said my baby won't wake up. He is cold and hard. Immediately, I knew the baby was gone. The thought of CPR never crossed my mind, so I tried to comfort her, and she asked if we could do CPR, and I thought, crap. What do I do? But I had to do CPR for her, to let her feel she did something, to help her baby, even though I knew he was gone. But just giving her the chance to help or feel like she did something was both painful for me, but helpful for her. I am 911. I took the call for the mother who was miscarrying her first child. She kept asking, what did I do? I didn't even do anything. Her husband kept reassuring her, you didn't do anything. All I could do was reassure them help was on the way, and I will be here until they arrive. I am 911. It was a busy storm day shift when I picked up the phone to hear a fire chief screaming in pain. He had been clearing a fallen tree and was struck by a car. The driver had been texting and was my caller. Thankfully, he survived, with a long road ahead to recover. I am 911. You called for a welfare check on your daughter and ex-girlfriend. I sent the police, and they found their bodies. A murder-suicide. My son was the same age. I am 911. We had a regular caller who would call every night saying, "Smile, beautiful," or "Jesus loves you." He would call all night. Then his mom would call back and apologize because he was off his meds. One night, his home caught on fire, and he did not make it. A few operators went to his funeral and felt like we lost a member of our family. He called so much, it felt like he knew us. I am 911. Our county went through lots of windstorms. Fires were all throughout the county, and nobody was listening to the burn bans. I got a call from a female, nothing but screaming and crying. I could not even get an address from her. I finally understood that her husband was on fire. I had to tell her to get blankets, rugs, and clothes. Whatever she could use to put it out. The fire grew around him, and she couldn't reach him. She had to wait until someone arrived to extinguish the fire. She stood there, watching him burn and die. I am 911. I took a 911 call from a man who was yelling, "Send me an ambulance. I cut my leg really bad." I said, "Okay, I'm sending help your way. How did you cut your leg?" He responded, "A knife fell off the grill." But in the background, I heard a female walking through the door yelling and screaming. And I asked, "Sir, who is that?" The female in the background, "Who are you talking to? Hang up." The caller then says, "I'm getting help for my leg. Look at it." And the phone disconnected. I then changed the call from a medical to a felony assault and domestic. Deputies got on scene, and they arrested the female, who had fled on foot with her kids. I am 911. When I train new dispatchers, part of it is explaining to them how they will be able to recognize the different tones in their officers' voices. I remember in particular, one of my sergeants was out on the road, pulled traffic, and came over the radio needing help. I could hear in his voice he was in trouble. I sent all the officers I possibly could to him, but in that moment, time stopped. It seemed like it took years by the time someone made it to him. If it would have worked for me to jump through the radio and get to him quicker, I would have. In that moment, I felt helpless. I am 911. These are the stories that were written and handed in from the attendants during the Imagine Listening session. The following is the audio from those who shared on the mic.
A call that comes to mind for me, a 911 call that took from a friend, a church member, who was trying to revive her husband as he was dying. And I remember I felt so bad because she was much younger and he was older, and so sometimes when I would see them together, oh, go do I would think that because he was much older and she was younger and prettier, she was a flight attendant, and when she called, I just heard so much panic, pain, and love in her voice that she felt for her husband. And I remember her just crying and screaming and saying, "Don't leave me, don't leave me, please. Don't leave me, don't leave me." And I knew at that moment she really loved me. And I felt bad, and I had to call her name and tell her who I was. And she just said, pray, pray, And so I had to shift from being an operator to being a church person and still being the operator, getting the officers there, getting EMS there. So I had to be all these small, people at one time for her in the call. But I just remember her really loving her husband. And he passed right there as she was trying to give him CPR. But I felt bad, but I felt good that I was the one that took the call and that she did have some comfort during the time that we were together with her husband in his last moments.
Thank you.
About a year and a half ago, I took a call from a lady who, in the week previous, had been being harassed by a guy wearing a screen mask. The first night, he broke her window and managed to slip away before the officers got up that way. But the night that I had talked to her, she had her 3 kids upstairs, put in bed, went out to let the dog out, and the dog started barking, so she went out to see what was going on, and the guy was just standing in her backyard with a knife and a screen mask. So I took the call. She was hiding in the house, and it took about 15 minutes for the police to get there. So for that entire time, she was trying to hide with the dog and try and figure out what's going on, but he kept moving from window to window. And so from my end of the phone, I'd get her calmed down, I'd get her somewhere where we thought she was safe, or waiting for the officers to get there, and then either the dog would bark or she would scream, and it was just like a horror movie. Because you can't see what's going on, but he was moving there was nowhere she could go interior in the house where he couldn't see her. And it was trying to keep her calm, and at the same time trying to keep myself calm, because how we react to it is obviously how they react to it, and vice versa. How she gets panicked would try and ratchet my level of stress up with it. And it was just a game of cat and mouse for 15 minutes, and I've never wanted to reach through the phone and try and help somebody as much as I did in those 15 minutes. And luckily, the guy stood around long enough that when the officers did arrive on scene, they had picked him up. And in that moment, the amount of relief you could hear from her voice, because it's just her and her kids, and she had seen him in the neighborhood in that week between when he broke the window and the night that I had spoken to her, and no one had been able to pick him up. And just the relief that someone finally, believed her that he was there, and that it was finally over, and that she could sleep and be, and know that her kids were safe. It was quite overwhelming.
Thank you for sharing.
So I took a call early on in my career, I had about a year on, and it was a mother who had found her baby SIDS. And at the time, I had a child around 2 years old, and as I was doing CPR with the mom, and she's sobbing, her 2-year-old woke up and was crying in the background. And I get through the call, the baby unfortunately passed. And I just went back to reading my book, and I remember thinking at the time that the job had broken me already. And it wasn't until a few years later, dealing with it, that I realized that was just what I needed to do at that moment to get through it. And that processing it later was what helped the next person.
Thank you. Thank you for sharing.
We had an open line, and just listening, nobody was responding. So we stayed on the line, and we kept hearing this woman say, "Maybe I can explain," and you hear this thwack. Then you hear a child screaming. It's probably about 8 or 9 maybe. He says, "Mommy," you keep trying to get back on the phone and everything just to see if somebody's there. And he said, "I don't care, I know what I saw, prove it." And she said, "Maybe I can explain, it's not what you think, the angles are all wrong." And you hear the child screaming again. come to find out, we never heard from anybody. They never directly spoke to Central. They just said, on the phone, baby, I can explain. So when we got an alley, and it came out to the middle of the woods, and there's like this little old trailer, so we were able to walk units back to the house. We had to jump over some stuff and everything, and finally heard a generator running. It said Central only in the right location. So it looks like they're about right. You should see something in about 50 feet or so. And you can hear them in the background. They're being very stealthy. And she's still saying, I can explain. Keep hearing the sweat. Keep hearing her child scream. Well, the man had grabbed the child and was holding forcefully. He says, tell me the truth. You know what you saw. Your mama, she did what she did. There's no explaining. The deputies get there, and then he's down on the ground. They finally got him and everything. Come to find out, he was beaten her with a frying pan. Ended up denting in the middle, had grabbed the child, and was getting ready to start on the child as well. Luckily, everybody was okay. He went to jail, and then the wife of the child, they ended up getting the help that they needed without actually saying anything directly to dispatch. They were just able to listen in, see what was going on, and send appropriate units to make sure that everything was going okay.
Thank you so much for sharing.
Let me preface this with, I dispatched for fire and police. We had a call from somebody at Breathing. Sent the fire department from our station 1. And station 1 was over there, so I sent station 2 on that. And we didn't know why. They ended up calling us and telling us that the captain never made it to the fire pit. He was found deceased and better. Obviously, all of these my phone rang. One of my police officers said, "What's going on in station 1?" And I said, "I'm not sure." And she said, "What's going on in station 1? Who is it?" She had gotten a message on her cell phone, and one of the firefighters was found deceased. It was her husband. It was my police officer's husband. And I had to be the one to tell her, "I'm sorry, it's your husband." And it was the worst moment in my 12-year career. It was the absolute worst. Listening to her scream and cry on the phone. And telling her, begging her not to drive from her home, which was 20 miles away, that we would come get her, and knowing that she was going to get in the car and drive. And of course, he didn't make it. And I sat with her most of the night and listened to her scream and cry. And it just reignited it over and over again.
Thank you for sharing.
So, previous story, I was an EMT, approximately 20 years ago, took a self-inflicted gunshot wound to the head. So seeing that was horrible in itself. Now as a dispatcher, a couple months ago, took a call from a mother who found her son gunshot to the head. Very traumatizing for her, obviously, it brought back so many emotions for me of dealing with that firsthand. She happened to be a nurse. She couldn't save him. You know, it was too late for him, but I stayed on the phone with her until police arrived, trying to reassure her. But after the fact, it was very devastating for me reliving that.
Thank you for sharing.
I took a lone domestic right after I came off the fourth person, which is just getting up to me. You never pick up 911 line near 5 minutes before going home. So it's a rolling domestic that stretched 3 counties and 45 minutes long. We had no idea where she was when she called. She had no idea where she was. We didn't have rapid SOS then, thank God for it. We had deputies behind her 90% of the time. During the call, all I could hear was her screaming. He didn't say a thing the entire time. She tried to work it out, got back in, pulled her right here. I could hear the car falling apart. She was like, "Am I gonna die?" I'm like, I'm gonna be with you, and you're probably gonna crash, but I'm gonna be here. With the whole time. I heard a crash, and nothing from her, but I could just hear the sirens wailing. Then I heard my trooper say, "I'm here, we're gonna get her." And I could hear her in the background, I'm like, "You made it, you're with my guys, and you're safe." And talked to the deputy, followed up the next day with her and said, if she hadn't called you, she would have been dead. He would have killed her. Planned on it. And he told me that I saved her. And he said if we get a call from her again and she goes back to him, she's gonna be dead. We have yet to get another call from that address, so thank goodness for that. But it was long as 45 minutes. Probably hers too.
Thank you so much for sharing.
I took a call and I picked you up just like a normal day. And he said I need an ambulance. So I got the address, got his name, phone number. And if you're familiar with Brooke, your first question was, okay, tell me exactly what happened. And he had some slurred speech and he didn't answer me after I asked that question. So I started as just a priority to unknown circumstances. So the fire department gets there, and I have a line open still, and they said, there's a gun. The guy had shot himself on the phone with me. Because he didn't want his wife to find him. So there's, I guess, comfort knowing that his wife didn't find him, and he was outside. He didn't want to leave a mess for her. There's very little comfort when you know somebody shoots himself on the phone with you. I wish I could have gotten help before he pulled the trigger, but that's a call that's gonna stick with me forever.
Thank you for sharing that story. And all of you for sharing your stories.
I took the phone call that morning. You had kissed your middle school son off to school and you stood in the doorway, watched him getting on a bus. He had headphones in crossing the street. And the bus had stopped and the red sign was displayed properly, but a guy on his way home from work just wasn't patient and he crossed around the bus and he hit your son. And you watched your son be drug under his vehicle in front of the bus. You call, I pick up. I was police dispatch that day. I wasn't supposed to pick up the phone, but it was shift change, so I picked up the phone quickly, not expecting to take that phone call. We're on the phone for a few minutes. I'm trying to calm you down. I've got help coming. You said there's a car stopping. Hold on, somebody's stopping to help. And the name that you said that stopped help was my father. He was a police officer on his way to work. And you said, he's here. It'll be okay. He's going to help me. And I just started crying, and it's an open line, and I can hear my dad on the line with you helping your son. And quick response came, and years later, I'm in the doctor's office having my children. And she comes behind me. I had never met her. She comes behind me, and she says, I know who you are. And it was your voice. It was you remaining calm, and your quick answering the phone, and your quick response of sending help. That her son's fine now. He was fine. And she said, thank you for what you do because you helped save his life that day.
Thank you so much for sharing that. Thank you, all of you, for the job that you do. What we've done here, sharing these stories, again, healing, getting some sort of closure together. It's hard to describe what it is like to be in a room like this, sharing these types of stories. To those who don't know, this is the power of storytelling. A lot of times we feel alone, or have felt alone. Now, after going through this, I hope that you do not feel alone. Reach out to those that you work with. Be there to support like you are here today, and support of each other in this profession. It's a hard one. You are the most vital piece of public safety. Thank you so much for what you do. A round of applause for all those who shared stories.
I want to thank everyone who shared stories during Imagine Listening for my keynote at the 2021 Michigan Public Safety Telecommunications Conference. As I said in the beginning, it's hard to explain what it is like being in a room with people who know exactly what you're going through when you answer a 911 call. The stories are powerful, very meaningful, impactful, and we're able to heal together and find some sort of closure in the power of storytelling. So thank you to all of you who shared stories, and to the rest of you for listening and supporting, but also overall for the I Am 911 movement in sharing these stories to allow people to understand what it is really like within the trenches of 911, and for others in 911 to learn from your calls, from your stories. Again, thank you so very much for everything that you do for being the most vital piece of public safety. This has been episode 419, and we are quickly heading towards 2022. There are so many more episodes that are coming up. And again, thank you for everything. I wouldn't be able to do what I do if it wasn't for all of you, for the job that you do, and for listening. Thank you. If you have any comments, questions, or you want to be a guest on the show, you can email us, and that is wttpodcast@gmail.com. You can follow us on Twitter. That is @91podcast. You can like us on Facebook. That is facebook.com/withinthetrenchespodcast. If you're looking for any bonus content, you can look us up and support us at patreon.com/WTT podcast. This episode has been sponsored by InDigital, Rapid Deploy, as well as Carbine. And you can listen 24/7 on Apple Podcasts, iHeartRadio, Spotify, your favorite podcasting app, as well as withinthetrenches.net. You can also watch on Facebook, Twitter, and our YouTube channel. There are a lot of changes coming in 2022, and one of those is a new sponsor, but you'll find out more about that here coming soon. Be safe out there, and I'll see you in the next one.